Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, Sweden's Prime Minister has been tweeting the wrong Liz Truss. A swan on a train track holds up rush hour commuters for an hour. One of my favourite lines from Dale Carnegie is still getting quoted. Show interest in others, and others will show interest in you. But I'm going to add a caveat to it. A discussion with Lindsay Barnett. Lindsay provides flexible and independent HR support and advice to busy HR teams and businesses. Question of the week. Why should we treat introverts more softly than everybody else? There's only one or two of them in the team anyway. Just before speaking to Lindsay, an apology. Due to personal issues, I haven't been able to produce the show for the last couple of weeks, which is frustrating for me as I've run the show weekly for nearly 3 years. But this week's show will be the last in the current series. Then there'll be a short gap and Series 3 will start. So, don't delete Activate Your Introvert and your favourites just yet. What's been introversial in the news this week? Sky News reports that Sweden's Prime Minister has been tweeting the wrong Liz Truss. A woman named Liz Trussell, who appeared to have nabbed the Twitter handle @LizTruss before the new Conservative leader, has been sending cheeky replies to people who think she's Britain's Prime Minister. Of course, the news has been full of a certain new leader and her party conference recently. What's your interpretation from it, and what learning points do you take about communication? I'm sure there's at least one lesson we can all take, whatever our political, egotistical, and intro or extroversion tendencies. Sky News reported swan on train track holds up rush hour commuters for an hour. A headline which, for once, says everything about the incident. A small thing derailed, pun intended, the day for many people. Are you good enough at spotting small things in your business and being able to deal with them in advance, or fairly quickly when they happen? A stronger team where people all speak their views can really make a difference with doing that. Inclusive leadership, therefore, can make a difference to your firm. The old master, Dale Carnegie, is still getting quoted today. A recent article in Psychology Today about conversational skills for introverts was interesting. The first point was Carnegie's from many years ago. Show interest in others, and others will show interest in you. Something introverts are great at doing. But I'm going to add a bit to it, courtesy of my friend Will Kintish, who's spoken before on this show about being at an event, and if he asks questions about the other person and gets nothing back, after 3 questions, if there's no reciprocation or interest in himself, he'll start to think about moving on. Some people will never be interested in people other than themselves. Don't always keep flogging a dead horse. That might be a good time to stop and go and speak to Lindsay Barnett. Welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
No, brilliant to have you on the show. In a couple of minutes, we're going to get into this discussion about leadership, employee engagement, and socialisation that goes on in many businesses. But just before we do that, I'd love to ask you, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And more importantly, what's that meant for you?
I'm a bit of both. Whilst that on the one hand can be an advantage, for me it's often a little bit of a disadvantage because I don't know which one's going to show up on which day. So I think sometimes I lean towards the extroversion, other times I'm definitely more introverted. I'm probably aligned more closely to the introverted style. I'm not always the first person to talk in a meeting, for example. I'm not the first person to offer my opinion, even though the extroverted Lindsay thinks that I absolutely should be. What that causes for me is some conflict in my head around which is the best way to go.
A couple of things come out of that for me. One is, I love that conflict piece you talked about, the little voice in the head that wants us to be seen or to do something else. But it certainly sounds to me as if you're base style, if I can put it like that for the purpose of this, is introversion, but that you've learned lots of tricks and techniques and tactics over the years in order to appear more extroverted at times, but find that tiring to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there.
How well do you think that leaders understand introversion?
It depends. Some leaders that I've come across tend to be, they might be more naturally astute and potentially more emotionally intelligent, and so they are aware of it and they have this in their thoughts. And then for others, and particularly those who might be themselves more naturally extroverted, but have realized that and undertaken some psychometric assessments, for example, and have learned about different preferences, different styles, and how this can show up in the workforce, and actually how it can be quite powerful as well to understand those differences and appreciate that added value of mix of styles can show up in the workforce.
And typically, we were talking about this thing about employee engagement, which is something you help lots of your clients with. Talk to us a little bit about that. What many people see employee engagement is and what it really is.
It's actually a huge topic, and ultimately, to really get to the crux of how to engage your workforce, you've got to ask them, and you've got to ask them regularly. It changes, workforce makeup changes. So for me, it's really important to be asking those questions, either via surveys, listening sessions, focus groups, however you want to do that. But then most importantly, it's putting those action plans in place, which I think is often where businesses get stuck, in that they do the survey, they gather the data, and then it's that finger in the air of what to do next. And that's where I can often help around that engagement piece and moving those action plans forward for them.
What about the typical idea around employee engagement, where somebody goes, oh, right, we've got to get everybody together, whether that's a social or a coffee or a team building exercise, whatever. Basically, they're enforced social activities. How well do you see those working?
This is one of my favourite topics, actually. What many leaders may not actually recognise, particularly if they're more extroverted themselves, is that these kinds of arrangements, the socials, the big group gatherings, the kind of you must attend these sessions type things, can actually disengage a large proportion of the workforce. So therefore, they're effectively making the very thing that they're seeking to improve potentially worse by doing that. So for me, it's really thinking about what are the different options available, and that leader using that awareness that there are different styles within that group, and not the answer not always being let's go out for a long meal and a long drinking session or whatever that might be, which to most introverts would sound like their idea of a complete nightmare. But that often tends to be one of the solutions that comes out of action planning workshops. It's we all need to socialise, we all need to go out together, and therefore we're going to be more engaged within the workforce. Actually, that's not always the answer in my experience.
Interesting, isn't it? So the survey says we want to spend more time together as a team. And I guess what you're really saying is that most of the more extroverted team members are saying that, and many of the introverted team members will be excluded because of that.
They'll make a choice, I guess. Different if it's an offsite, a part of the working day where you really do have to attend, but they might be there under duress and therefore won't be giving them their full selves to that session. But when it's a social event, they're either just not going to go at all, or they're going to go and spend potentially the whole night thinking, when can I leave? So again, really not getting that added value that leader might be seeking to achieve through that social engagement.
I completely agree, and I've seen it happen countless times. In your experience, when you said you've got those two choices, one where the introvert just doesn't show up for the social, and by the way, there are some extroverts who don't like those socials either, of course, just to make it more complicated.
Yeah.
So you've got some that don't attend, and you've got some that do attend, but in the back of their head, they're going, when can I get away? In your experience, what's driving that? Is that are they just being plain awkward, or is there something else?
because I often have this thought going through my head when I've been to socials, and I can say for myself, it's not that I want to be awkward. I'm slowly losing my energy. Often introverts will have to think in their heads before they ask a question or engage in a conversation. When you're in an extended social scenario like that, you haven't got time on your side to be thinking before you speak and those kinds of things, which are typically more introverted tendencies. So that's completely exhausting the individual. So they may be giving off the perception that they're awkward, not interested, difficult to get along with or whatever. It's potentially not any of that, because actually they're just getting more and more exhausted the longer and longer that they're there.
I've seen absolutely that happen regularly when people just know that they're getting more exhausted or know that they will. And there's a natural tendency to try and preserve that energy, isn't there? So if you know you're going to lose a load, you try and hold on to some. Always made worse, of course, when you're told, well, you can't go until we're finished at 10 o'clock in the evening or whatever time, because then you go, now I've got to try and share that energy out amongst myself another 3 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Where I'd encourage leaders to think differently is to think of a different mix of activities, and maybe to think about a more timed approach to things. And also going back to what I said earlier is ask. And again, don't ask in the typical extroverted way of, I'll do it on the next team meeting, where everybody will put their hands up in front of each other, because surprise, surprise, what's going to happen again is that the introverts are unlikely to say, actually, I'd prefer a theatre visit, for example. So they might still want to socialise with their peers, but to do something different that isn't that constant talking. So the example of the theatre visit is a good one. It's an opportunity to sit and listen, and then have a conversation about something specific, i.e. the play that you've just watched, or a cooking class is another example, as opposed to that almost forced conversation that tends to be the more pub or meal type event.
So I guess the answer is it's about a mixture of different ways of socialising, meeting. As you said, theatre visits or the like, great. It could just be as simple as drop-in sessions, so that people can drop in and see you on a one-to-one basis, or perhaps asking for questions in advance if you're going to do the kind of town hall sort of thing, rather than expecting everyone to shout them out in the middle. Also ask for some in advance, because that allows the introverts to do that. I guess what's underpinning a lot of what you're saying is we're looking to engage people, but unless we're careful, it's easy to disengage a large chunk of people.
And all that time and effort that you've put into the engagement survey or the listening session or the focus group or whatever it is that you've done to gather that really rich data could all potentially be lost, because it's even further disengaging certain members. Engagement isn't purely around socials. Obviously, there are other factors to engagement, but in terms of this particular example, around getting along with peers and productivity that's linked to that, in this example, it could very well backfire.
Absolutely. So can I ask you for a tip for an introvert, perhaps to survive some of these type of activities?
I would encourage them to put forward some different suggestions in their own way. Again, that might not be in a meeting. It could be an email after the meeting, something like that, but to suggest something different, work, running, football, netball, club, something like that, trip to the theatre we talked about, or a cooking class. And then the other piece, if those things are not an option, I would encourage them, if it is the meal and drinks type event, for them to set themselves a personal time limit of what feels comfortable to them, and tell a small group of people that I'm going to be going at 9 o'clock. So you're setting that scene and setting that expectation that you're going to have the meal, and then at 9 o'clock you're going to be going. So just say that from the start, and then in their heads they know that they've got that time limit.
Got the escape route. How about we flip the other way then? A tip for a leader who wants to increase engagement.
The starting point for a leader is, if they haven't done so already, I'd really encourage them to use things like a psychometric tool to really understand their own personal preferences, because that's really important as well, but also the makeup of their team, because that will not only help in terms of how to engage those different groups, but it, as I mentioned earlier, can also be really powerful in determining things like preferred work projects. So that will then go on to support well-being as well as engagement and productivity. So the use of those psychometric tools that don't need to be overly complicated, I'd really encourage leaders to consider using some of those.
Brilliant, thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Lindsay, and I'm sure that some of the people listening are going, how can we get back in touch with Lindsay?
This is relatively simple. My name, so my website is lindsaybarnetthr.com.
Lindsay, it's been wonderful to talk. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, John. I've really enjoyed it.
My takeaways from the discussion were: 1. It's easy to disengage a large part of the team when trying to engage your team. 2. Ask in different ways what people want. 3. Consider socialising ideas which involve talking about the specific event, not general chat. And number 4. Get to know and understand your own preferences so you don't always impose them on others. What would you like to know about introversion in business? This week's question comes from Steve. Why should we treat introverts more softly than everybody else? There's only 1 or 2 of them in my team. Thanks, Steve. It's a great question which underpins many of the things I've been covering on this show, and why so many people in the workforce feel frustrated and unable to perform at their best. But I hope that's not true of your team. There's several parts to my answer. Firstly, introverts typically are about 1/3 or more of your workforce, so it's unlikely for it only to be 1 or 2, and 1/3 is a big enough proportion to think about. Secondly, if you want the whole team to engage more, to get on better as a team and be more productive, you'll want them all to feel more comfortable, understood, and motivated. My survey of over 450 people in business shows a large proportion are not fully productive, and the reasons are an overlap of communication styles in the business, company culture, and introversion. Company culture and communication styles are something all leaders have a strong influence on. Use that influence well. One of the things I've often spoken about in this series is that it's not about treating introverts differently, and certainly not softly. I hate the term snowflakes, it's derogatory, but introverts are not snowflakes. However, it is about understanding that different people in your team need to be approached differently. In an ideal world, all your team members would be treated in the exact way they want, by you and all of the rest of the team. Okay, that's not possible. But a significant proportion of most teams are introverted, and minor changes in the way we do things have a big impact, not just on 1 or 2 shy people. No, introversion has got nothing to do with shyness. Run meetings and one-to-one discussions so we make space for different types of communication to happen more easily. The people who rapidly shout out random answers have a fantastic place in the team and in the meeting, but their style can easily swamp others, and they really do not have all the answers, especially all the details, despite what they may think. Today's discussion with Lindsay picked out many elements of socialising with teams. Socialising with a team can be good for building a team together, although it's not the only thing to do. Don't just run social events that favour certain styles like pubs or restaurants. I don't ask anybody to treat introverts differently. I suggest that a more inclusive management style will get you stronger teams with better retention rates, creativity, and most importantly, productivity. I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintrovert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.